In this episode, we're going to be going over Final Quest by Chisholm, which is a very popular grade 3 piece that a lot of string orchestras play in contests and in festivals. There's a lot of really great writing in this piece. There's a lot of contrast between the 16th notes and sustained notes. There's a lot of different stylized accents here, and later on in the piece, we can even get some off-the-string playing in first violins. We get a contrast of tempi. There's a tempo change in the B section at measure 40, and then the A section comes in D major instead of D minor. And because of all these different contrasts of note lengths and styles and rhythms and all that kind of stuff, the students really get into this piece. They really enjoy it. And if you set up their technique well enough in the classroom, you can give them some practice strategies where they can actually enjoy the process of learning this piece at home. Another great thing about Final Quest is that there's melodic material in all sections. Nobody gets left out. Now, if you don't have a bass section that's used to playing independently from your cello section, that could be an issue. So there's some strategies that I'll have for you to be able to help accomplish that if your bass section needs a little bit help. But some bass sections are ready to go, and they need material that's separate. They need to be a bass section, not just a bigger part of the cello section. You know, like it's not a big cello, it's a bass. So it's got a lot of writing where we have a lot of entrances that help propel these 16th notes and some of these 8th note anacrusi that keep the piece moving forward, and the basses can have a lot of fun if they're set up to play it well. Now, this is a real grade 3. It's not like, oh man, I got to play a grade 3 this year. What's the easiest grade 3 I can get a hold of? This is definitely not the easiest grade 3. It's a real grade 3. You're going to need to have an orchestra that's fairly comfortable with shifting for the most part. You're going to need to have an orchestra that can play in many different dynamic ranges. This piece goes all the way down to piano in the B section, here at measure 52, and it goes all the way up to fortissimo, here at the end, 83. You're going to have an orchestra that has enough bow control to layer all of those dynamics in there. You're also going to need to have an orchestra that is comfortable with vibrato, because there's a lot of sustained notes. And if you're playing this for a festival or for a contest, that's going to help your group out in the tone categories. Because of the key change, you're going to need to have your students learn 4 different finger patterns, depending on how you finger this, and they're going to have to understand how those work and where they are to be applied, you know, and which key and in which position. So that can get a little tricky if your students aren't used to playing all sorts of different finger patterns. This may not be the piece for your group. Final Quest has got a few tempo changes. It's got a transition into the B section that slows down, and then changes tempo again when the A section comes back, and then there's a rallentando here at the end. So you're going to need to have an orchestra that's comfortable enough to where they can follow a little bit, because the tempo will change, and you need to be able to set that for them. I think that Final Quest works really well for a string orchestra that has a wide range of technique within the group. You know, you've got ways to challenge more advanced players, and I'm going to show you some ways that you can simplify if you've got students that aren't quite ready for something like this. But if you're thinking about the whole group and you know, what do I program for so that, you know, these students over here don't get bored and these students over here don't get overwhelmed, well, there's some things that we can do. So first of all, students that are in more need of a challenge, there's definitely some things that we can do going through here. So places like measure 8, we can start having the first violins go into 3rd position, and there's a lot of this that falls very well in the left hand in 3rd position. So avoiding those open strings or string crossings going from E to F natural, we do that in 3rd position, E to F natural here with regular major pattern or 2/3 pattern, whatever nomenclature you use for that. Same thing in measure 9, same fingering, just on a lower string. So as we go through this again, places like measure 17 work out really well in third position for first violins. In fact, it works out even better. So it might even be more of a challenge to play it in first position. The Andante probably has the best material in there to challenge your players. Just the way it's written, a lot of this falls very comfortably in third position. You've got right from the beginning of the Andante at 40, you can shift into third position on beat 3 and stay in third position for pretty much for most of this, all the way through to 52, and then you can shift back. There's places like 57 where the first and second violins could play in third position and or second position even for the second violins, and I'll cover that more in detail later. For your low strings, you can have them do some shifting as well, because a lot of these passages, like in measure 42, 43, and this part right here in measure 46, that sounds a lot better if you can play that in position. It's a little tricky to learn, but I'll go over that in a bit more detail as well when we start talking about the détaché 16th notes. Now, if you have first violins that are lower on the end of the technique spectrum, you can play a lot of the stuff that's written in first position down an octave or cover the part differently. So I'll give you some examples of what you can do. So for instance, in 13, if they can't get up there for the C or for to play that part in third position, you can just have them play an open E, which is covered by the second violins. If you choose to play that open E, that open E makes for a good shift point to go, but you can have them play that fourth finger on the A string since they've already played a D anyway, so that you don't get so much open E. But if you're working on your E string tone, and I've got an entire episode in season 1 on the E string, so go check that out if you want some tips on how to improve your violin's E string tone. In measure 25, it's kind of the same idea. You can just have them cover the second violin part if they're not comfortable getting up to that C again, and that'll help quite a bit. Now, you shouldn't be doing this for your entire first violin section, but if you've got a couple of students that just aren't comfortable with shifting, and it's like, well, the contest is in 2 weeks, I think this type of stuff is a lot better than soaping bows, because I don't know of any student that benefits from that. So if we can make them more comfortable to where at least they can be learning something, eventually they'll catch up. A lot of the first violin part, when they go up an octave, is doubled by the second violins like it is here in 60, 61, etc. They can take down the Ds all the way through that section. That probably nobody will notice if just a couple of them are doing it. At the end here, it gets a little tricky in this third position stuff. Talking about measure 91, 92, 93, what happens is that everything, if they play it down an octave, everything is covered in either the second violin or viola. It just isn't covered always by the same section. Sometimes, you've got doubling by the second violin here, and then all of a sudden it changes a little bit to where we've got everything's doubled here so far, but for the later part of this, when we get to the second triplet in 92 here, the part becomes a little bit more independent where first violins are by themselves, but if you just have a couple of students play it down an octave, probably nobody will notice. They'll notice a lot less than if they're playing it as written and they don't have the technique to do it, and they're playing with bad tone and they're playing out of tune. So that might be a good option if you've got students that they're just not quite ready. They'll be there next year. For right now, you're just making the music more accessible for them. Throughout this episode, I'm going to share with you my tips and tricks for how to get this piece done and how to play as cleanly as possible. I'm going to go over some of the basics, some of the basic technique that I think every orchestra needs to have before they start getting going, and some exercises that your students can play to stage and build up that technique until they can play what's written here. And I'm also going to go over a lot of the treble spots. This is a popular piece, and as a judge, I hear it at just about every contest and festival. At least one orchestra is probably going to play Final Quest. And so by now, I've started to understand where the pitfalls are going to occur, and I've developed some strategies for how to make those better. So we'll see you in the next episode when we talk about the Detaché 16th notes.